keeping you wondering about the economy because signs yet again that retail sales are not up to speed, not across the board, and not for every retailer. But to Lenore Hawkins, I'm looking at this and saying, well, at the very least, if you were betting on a rate hike at least next month, that seems very unlikely now. What do you think?
Well, on top of that, so we saw the retail sales numbers that came out today were not as bad as we feared, because we've been seeing all the retailers were reporting that their sales were well below expectations. You know, most of the stocks are getting hit hard. So today's April report was better than expected, although not for brick and mortar. But if we're looking at the Fed rate hike, the other thing to keep in mind is that that vote on the UK leaving the Eurozone, that's just a couple days after the June meeting, and that could really rock the markets. So I don't see the Fed adding something more in with a rate hike that would just make the markets even more nervous.
What do you think of the tone of the markets right now? And they're always betwixt and between. It always depends on the day. But the growing consensus that the Federal Reserve doesn't hike because whatever these gyrations, whatever you see with this surprising uptick in April retail sales, most of the individual retailers themselves, save Amazon, of course, which is in a camp of its own, aren't looking too promising and aren't reporting numbers that are that promising. So what's the real deal?
Well, if you look at overall sales, so not just retail sales, but overall business sales, they've been down the past 2 years, and right now they're down about 14% from where they were in 2014. So that's not really boding well. We've seen for the S&P 500, quarter after quarter, sales keep declining. Companies have managed to squeeze out a little bit of earnings through cost cutting, but that's not really a robust view of the economy. And if you look at instead of retail sales just month to month, because month to month you can get like Valentine's Day or Easter, and that can kind of throw things off. By looking at the 3-month moving average, and that's just, you know, try to get rid of those monthly bumps, that has been in basically recessionary levels for quite a long time, for more than a couple years. I mean, we've never really gone to the highs that we've seen in prior business cycles. You know, since the Great Recession, the economy's just barely getting going. There's all kinds of other structural headwinds, and the Fed, no matter how much money they pump into the system, they're really not getting it going because the problem isn't monetary policy. But
if there are people who are going to be traveling and they're expecting record crowds, and I always find that speeches are going because we have more people than we did a year ago, but they are expecting a busy travel season. The money's there to spend, right? There is a sort of a pent-up willingness to spend. The savings rate has gone up, so there's obviously a little bit wherewithal there. Does that influence the Federal Reserve at all?
Well, I think the Fed's looking at a bit more than that, too, because they just came out with a study showing that 47% of all Americans don't have $400 to handle an emergency. That's 47%. That's a pretty big number. So when they talk about the savings rate increasing, well, it's increasing, but there's not a whole lot of savings to start with, and it's not really a bad thing to see people saving more. And yes, Americans are spending a little bit more, but when we look at the last GDP numbers that came in, the big areas for spending have been housing and health care. Well, housing, the Fed wants asset prices to go up. So shocker, asset prices have gone up, and that means homes are more expensive, and that means you have to pay more just to put a roof over your head. And we've all seen what's going on with the Affordable Care Act that's not so affordable, and how much that's increasing. You put those two together, and that's a lot of people's wallets, and it doesn't leave much left over for them to go and have fun and spend on the good stuff.
All right, Lenore, thank you. Have a great weekend.